Hi everyone, welcome back to the Communication and Conflict YouTube channel, promoting mindful communication, growth through conflict. So today I want to talk about listening. So in mediation, listening is a very, very important part of the process for so many reasons. But one is that it allows people who are experiencing a difficulty to express what that difficulty is in a way that genuinely feels heard, that gives them the space to kind of really put it out there, to talk about it, to reflect on it, to reconsider it, to decide how they feel about it, and if they're having difficult feelings about it, what they might be able to do to support themselves with that. And in a way, without there being that full listening opportunity that it gives to people, um, it means it's going to be that much harder for people to actually create that change, because the very act of being able to express themselves means it's like they're able to put it out on the table and then look in on it. It's not kind of all caught up inside them and kind of, tying them up in knots. It's like giving them a chance to put it out on the table, to look at what it is they're saying, and then to think, okay, is that how I want it to be? Is that what I want to continue, or do I want to create changes? What are the things I can create change in? What are the things I can't create change in because they're not within my power? What can I do that is within my power that still supports me with my difficult situations? So all of those things are only going to be made possible if people can kind of put out on the table what it is that they're saying. And that's only going to be achieved by someone who's a very good listener. So the listening experience that the person who has a difficulty has through mediation is designed to be one where they can, in a sense, take full responsibility for what's going on in their lives, um, and to be able to kind of see that actually they do have capacity for change. When people are kind of so caught up in what's going on, they kind of can't see a way out. They can feel very stuck in their situation. So listening is crucial as part of the process which mediation um, brings to people involved in difficult situations. Now, in the model that I use and the people that I train in mediation use, there is always a one-to-one discussion with people before any decision is made about whether they go to a joint meeting. But in many ways, what I'm going to describe today applies in both the joint meeting that people have with the other person that they have a difficulty with, and in the one-to-one meetings. So what I want to focus on really is when we're having a one-to-one discussion with people. But what I'm saying, as I say, has relevance to joint meetings as well, to meetings between people. But one of the significant things about listening that often doesn't happen, and it's the thing that can kind of really let down the experience for people in what they're hoping will be a listening opportunity for them to share what their concerns are. Um, One of the things that most significantly spoils the experience for people is when the listener starts to bring in their own ideas and fixes and what sometimes called reframes of what the person's saying. I tend to call reframes my frames, because it's where the listener is wanting to make what the person has said fit more their own viewpoint on things, their own experience. They're wanting to bring their own kind of values and interpretations and kind of shapings or framings into what's said. And it's often suggested to be a thing that's meant to help the person who's speaking, but actually, in many ways, it's a distraction from being listened to, because the person then has to think, is that what I said? Is that what I mean? And then, in a sense, they can't continue to reflect on what it is they've actually said. Um, but it's often kind of suggested to be a good skill in listening. But I'll explain to you the reasons why I really don't agree with that. In mediation, one of the things that's really important is people are able to take ownership of their experience. both in terms of what they've done, how they feel about it, how they perceive their situation. Because when they're able to take full ownership of what it is they've experienced, they're more aware of what they can do to support themselves. When people don't feel ownership, or don't feel able to acknowledge ownership of what their experience is and what they can do for themselves and what they can't do for themselves, but that's an important distinction, then when they're able to do that, it supports them being able to empower themselves as well, because then they can create choices for themselves about what's going to be best for them. If somebody listening, and I put that kind of in inverted commas, if someone listening starts to bring in their own interpretations of the person's account or story or viewpoint or perspective of the situation, they're kind of losing ownership of it, because now the listener is now saying, so perhaps it would be a good idea if you did this, or so it sounds like you're saying this, and what the person says might not be what they've actually said. It might be the listener's interpretation of what they've said. So what the person who's speaking has to do now is work with the listener's interpretation rather than their own interpretation or their own perspective. So therefore that confuses things and it makes it harder for them. It doesn't help them, it makes it harder. They're having to deal with the listener's viewpoint, and maybe that listener's got nothing to do with the problem. If the person's there saying they're going to be a supportive listener and they're kind of independent of the situation, but they're then bringing in their own thoughts and opinions and fixes, it actually inhibits the creativity of the person who has the difficulty from getting on and working out for themselves what they need to do. So examples of what I mean are that someone tells someone else about their difficulty, and the person who's taking it in, supposedly listening, says, "Oh, you sound really angry about that," or "It sounds like you need this, that, or the other." And that suggestion or viewpoint can only come from the listener making their own analysis of the person's situation, which won't be the other person's analysis. It will be their independent, separate, subjective analysis, and then throwing back their version of the story. So now the person who was originally speaking has got to deal with somebody else's version of their situation. So they're no longer dealing with their issue, they're dealing with the listener's interpretation of their issue. And that can't be the same, because they're a different person. They've had a different life, they've got different values, they've got different judgments, they've got different sensibilities, sensitivities, red flags. Everything about their worldview will be different to the person who they're supposedly listening to. So therefore it's not actually supporting the person in taking control of their situation, it's taking control away from it, because it's saying, I don't want you to deal with your version, even though it's you that has difficulty. I want you to deal with my version of it. Now, how that plays out quite often in listening, and the reason why my purpose in talking about this as a listening video, a video about listening and what constitutes effective and good listening, is that often the intention of the people doing this is they think they're trying to help, and there's obviously a good intention in that. It's kind of a it's a kind intention, but what often they're not acknowledging is they're trying to fix the other person for themselves, because they're looking at their version of the situation, suggesting a fix and thinking, there, I'll pass back my answer to the person. And so in a sense it's almost a little bit patronizing, because it's saying, you obviously can't sort this out yourself, so I'm going to analyze it and work it out for you, and then I'm going to give you an answer. So it kind of disempowers people to do that, or it risks disempowering. Anybody can reject it, but why do we have to put them in the position of rejecting it in the first place? when actually we can be more supportive of the person by when they say what they have to say, and we listen, and we can just say back to them what they've said in their words, so that we're not trying to change or twist or analyze or spin or reframe what they're saying. We just use their words and we summarize back to them in their words. And then if we're going to ask any questions after that, they won't be questions like, so have you tried speaking to the other person? Because again, that's trying to take over how they deal with it. It's trying to fix them. And they may not want to speak to the person. And honestly, the number of times when that question is asked and actually the person's already long ago considered talking to the person and decided they didn't want to, or long ago tried speaking to the person and it didn't work from their perspective. So it's almost like, yeah, they don't want to know, but they also are put in a position where they feel they have to justify not doing what the person's suggesting. So it's intended to help again, but it's not helping. It's actually kind of almost cornering them and not giving them a chance to talk about their own experience. But if we're going to ask any questions, we can ask open questions. We can say, so, okay, what do you want to happen now? How might that be possible? What communication has happened with this person? And it may be there's been some, maybe there's not been any, but the point is we're just helping the person to reflect on what's happened so that they can continue with their story and their perspective on the situation. But we're not trying to suggest what they should do. We're not trying to tell them how they're thinking. We're not trying to tell them how they should reframe it and say it in a different way. We're not trying to identify what we think they need. We're just helping them to decide all those things by asking open questions. And when we say back to people what they've said using their words, it means we're helping them to hear themselves. They're not hearing our version of themselves. And for me as a mediator, that would mean and include if someone said, I've got a problem with my neighbour, they're a fucking tosser. And apologies to anybody listening who doesn't like that language, but if they said that, I would say back to them, okay, so you said you've got a problem with your neighbour because they're a fucking tosser. Now, if I didn't say that back to them, and I said, oh, it sounds like you've got a problem with your neighbour and you're unhappy about it, I'm not giving them an opportunity to hear how they're expressing themselves and to recognise maybe how strongly they feel about their neighbour, how they're expressing themselves about their neighbour, to reconsider for themselves how they may or may not want to change how they're speaking about their neighbour. They may not want to. That's up to them. But the point is, I'm not sanitising it for my benefit. I'm not changing it so that I feel better. Or I'm not trying to suppress their anger or suppress their expression like I think I need to stop them speaking that way. Because I'm not going to stop them speaking that way. I might get them not to just for my benefit while I'm there, but I'm not being very authentic with them and I'm not allowing them to be authentic by doing that. So why would I change what they're saying? That's how they feel. I'm giving them a chance to put that out on the table as one more thing for them to consider. But if I'm changing it and I'm giving interpretations of it and I'm bringing all my stuff into it, what they're getting out on the table is not what they've said. They're getting my version of it. I mean, another analogy that we sometimes use on a training course when we're talking about this is my role as a mediator is to help people to kind of, in a sense, create something new. So it's about giving them the opportunity to kind of have a kind of blank canvas and decide, so what do I want to be different, or what do I want to create in this situation that works better for me? But if I'm changing what the person said, or I'm not giving them a chance to hear back what they've said, if I don't give them a summary of what they've said in their words, and instead I'm putting in, have you tried this, or it sounds like you need that, or it sounds like you're feeling this, I'm not giving them a blank canvas. I'm giving them a canvas with my splatters all over it, that they've then got to work with that instead of their own blank canvas. I'm not giving them a chance for them to create their own way forward and to create just what they want. They're having to create something that I've decided I've got to have a part in. So I'm not listening. I'm not listening if I do that. So these are the things where I often see suggestions that people are listening well. And sometimes they do. They'll listen, they'll give lots of space to the person to speak. They may even summarize back using the words of the speaker. Although I have to be honest, that's quite rare. It really means on our training courses sometimes we have to really address why it's important they do that, because so often people are used to giving their reframes or their suggestions or their "it sounds like you need this" kind of inputs. And that's fine, because we're talking about using listening in mediation, but it is something that we need to address because it goes against the idea that we're giving people the opportunity to take ownership of their situation, and through having ownership of it to then create their own way forward, because that's the only way it's going to be sustainable. If they're creating a way forward which is created by us through our inputs and fixes and interpretations, what they leave with is not going to be something that's sustainable, because they're going to keep needing us to tell them how they should do it. And they don't need that in the first place anyway. They're quite capable of creating their own answers. So why would we want to do that for them? So as I say, some people kind of will listen and summarize back, maybe in the words of the person as they've said them. But unfortunately, it will sometimes still be the case that then there'll be suggestions for what they should do differently. Why don't you try this, or have you tried this, or would it be a good idea to do that, or I've done this myself, why don't you try it? And it's actually effectively just dismissing the other person's opportunity or belief in their capacity to create their own answers, and the listener is thinking they've got to fix them, rather than just keep listening to them. Just keep giving that space for the person to talk, to reflect and create what it is they're wanting going forward, without our splattering across their canvas what it is we think they should be creating, what they should be drawing, painting, whatever. So I'm raising this because quite often I hear a lot about people being listened to, and that's a great idea, particularly now that it's becoming more awareness of how people perhaps feel uneasy about various things, but various things which are coming under the heading of mental health difficulties. And it's suggested that people should talk to someone. And I'm often thinking, well, who's actually going to listen? And listen in a way which is supportive, rather than perhaps in a way which almost reinforces someone's sense of despair, because the other person's taking over their problem with a kind of suggestion that they can't deal with it themselves, that the speaker can't deal with it themselves. And so really, what is it that means there's good listening? Because I think quite often it's said as a thing to do, that people should talk to other people, and that people should listen. But actually, what do we mean by listening? And how much are we genuinely providing support for someone who wants to talk? Or are we, in a sense, just taking over their problem, suggesting they're incapable, and wanting to fix them more for our benefit than for a purpose of supporting them in creating their own answers? So, as is often the case, that's taken a lot longer than I intended, but I hope it gives you something to ponder and reflect on and consider for yourself as to your own practices with regard to listening, and whether you've got any thoughts or comments about that, or disagreements or agreements or viewpoints about what I've just said. Please put them, as always, in the comments below. And if you'd like to see future videos, please subscribe and like the video if you liked it as well. Thanks very much for watching. Bye bye.